The stars stretched across the void like scattered diamonds as Princess Valith Serena stood at the observation deck of her diplomatic cruiser. Watching the human vessel approach through the darkness of space, she was tall and slender, her silver skin reflecting the soft glow of distant nebulae, her four eyes narrowing as she studied the incoming ship with obvious disappointment. The vessel was called the Resolute, and it was nothing special by galactic standards, a mid-sized frigate with basic weaponry and standard shields. The kind of ship that minor species use for patrol duties and cargo escort missions. Her chief advisor, an elderly Aetherian named Counselor Brath, stood beside her with his hands folded behind his back. The human security detail will board within the hour. Your Highness, he said in his deep, rumbling voice. Valith did not turn from the window as she replied. Remind me again why we requested humans for this assignment. It was your father's suggestion. Your Highness, Brath said carefully, a gesture of goodwill toward the newer species in the galactic community, showing that the Aetherian Dominion welcomes their participation in important diplomatic matters. Valith finally turned, her expression revealing her true feelings about the matter. My father wishes to appear progressive and inclusive, she said, but he sends me to the most dangerous peace summit in a decade with guards who have barely mastered interstellar travel. The humans have proven themselves capable in several minor conflicts. Brath offered minor conflicts. Valith repeated with a dismissive wave of her hand. Border skirmishes with pirates and territorial disputes with other young species. Nothing that would prepare them for protecting Aetherian royalty. She walked away from the window, her flowing robes trailing behind her like liquid silver. The humans had only made contact with the greater galactic civilizations 30 years ago, which made them infants by the standards of species that had traveled among the stars for millennia. They were considered useful for certain tasks. They bred quickly, adapted to various environments with surprising ease, and seemed willing to take on dangerous work that other species avoided. But they were not warriors. Not like the Krathvex with their armored hides and razor claws, or the Marvathi with their deadly venom and perfect reflexes. Humans were soft, fragile creatures who had somehow stumbled their way into space without destroying themselves. First, when the human contingent finally boarded, Valith made sure to be present in the docking bay, if only to fulfill the minimum requirements of diplomatic courtesy. 20 soldiers marched through the airlock in neat formation, their gray armor plain and undecorated, their faces hidden behind simple helmets that lacked the ornate designs. Favored by more established military forces, they moved in silence, their boots making soft sounds against the metal floor as they assembled before the princess. One of them stepped forward and removed his helmet. Valith found herself looking at a young man with short brown hair and tired eyes, his face unremarkable in every way she could imagine. There were no scars to suggest combat experience, no hardness in his expression to indicate a life of military service. He looked like someone who had joined the armed forces because he had no better options, not because he was born for battle. Private First Class Danny Rice. Ma'am, he said, his voice flat and professional, carrying neither enthusiasm nor resentment. I have been assigned as your personal guard for the duration of the summit. Valith studied him for a long moment, making no effort to hide her disappointment. Private First Class, that was barely above the lowest enlisted rank in human military structure, a position given to soldiers who had completed basic training and nothing more. They had sent her a recruit, a young man who probably had never seen real combat, never faced an enemy who truly wanted to kill him. Very well, she said, her tone making clear exactly what she thought of this arrangement. Try to stay out of the way. Danny Reyes did not react to the dismissal in his expression, did not show any sign of offense or embarrassment. He simply nodded once and took his position 3 steps behind her, silent as a shadow, present but unobtrusive in exactly the way she had requested over the next 2 days as they traveled toward Nexera Station. Valeth barely acknowledged his existence. He was always there when she turned around, always standing at attention outside her quarters, always watching the corridors with those tired eyes that seemed to miss nothing while revealing even less. She found his constant presence mildly annoying, like a piece of furniture that had been placed in an inconvenient location. The other members of her entourage, her handmaidens, her advisors, the Aetherian guards who served as her official security detail, treated the human soldiers with polite indifference. They were tools, nothing more, brought along to make a political statement rather than to provide actual protection. Counselor Brath attempted to engage Danny in conversation once, asking about Earth and human culture and the various worlds they had colonized in their short time among the stars. Danny answered each question with minimal words, providing information without elaboration, never volunteering anything beyond what was specifically asked. "He's a strange one," Brath commented to Valeth afterward. "Not unfriendly, but not open either, like a door that has been closed but not locked." "He is a soldier," Valeth replied without interest. "They are trained to follow orders and remain silent. There is nothing strange about it." But Brath was not entirely satisfied with that explanation. He had met soldiers from dozens of species throughout his long career, and most of them carried themselves with some kind of presence, pride in their strength, confidence in their abilities, awareness of their own importance. Danny Reyes carried himself like someone who expected nothing and needed nothing, someone who had made peace with whatever the universe might throw at him. It was not the bearing of a young recruit. Brath thought it was the bearing of someone much older, someone who had seen things that aged the soul even if the body remained young. But he kept these observations to himself, because the princess had made clear that she had no interest in discussing the humans. They arrived at Nexera Station on the 3rd day, and Valeth prepared herself for the political challenges ahead, never imagining that the greatest challenge would come from an enemy she had not anticipated, and that her survival would depend entirely on a young human soldier she had dismissed as just a recruit. Nexera Station hung in the void between 12 different territorial boundaries, a massive structure of interconnected domes and corridors that served as neutral ground for species who could not trust each other enough to meet in their own space. It was old, built centuries ago by a civilization that had long since vanished, and it carried the weight of countless negotiations, treaties, and betrayals within its metal walls. Princess Valeth stepped off her shuttle and into a world of chaos disguised as Order representatives from over 40 species had gathered for the Peace Summit, filling the station's corridors with a bewildering variety of shapes, sizes, and colors. There were the massive Krathvex, towering creatures covered in natural armor that could deflect energy weapons, their clawed hands capable of tearing through steel. There were the Morvathi, slender and graceful with skin that shifted colors to match their moods, their movements fluid and beautiful and deadly. There were the Selenari, the Vorthik, the Drenith, and dozens of others, each species bringing their own guards, advisors, and agendas to the gathering. Danny Reyes walked 3 steps behind Valeth as she made her way through the crowd, his helmet back on, his posture alert but not aggressive. She had almost forgotten he was there until she felt his presence shift slightly as they passed a group of Krathvex warriors. She glanced back and saw that his head had turned ever so slightly, tracking the aliens as they moved away in the opposite direction. "Is something wrong, Private?" she asked, more out of curiosity than concern. "No, ma'am," he replied. His voice filtered through his helmet speakers. "Just observing." Valeth dismissed the comment and continued toward the diplomatic quarter where her accommodations had been prepared. The summit officially began the next morning, and she threw herself into the political work that had brought her here: trade negotiations with the Selenari, border discussions with the Vorthik, careful conversations with rivals and allies alike. Through it all, Danny Reyes remained at his post, silent and watchful, a gray shadow that followed her everywhere on the second day. Valith noticed something strange. The Krathvex delegation had requested a tour of the station's environmental systems. Citing concerns about atmospheric compatibility with their biology, it was a reasonable request on its surface. But Valith saw Danny's head turn toward the ventilation grates whenever they passed one, his attention lingering for just a moment longer than normal later that afternoon. She observed him studying the Morvathi ambassador's security detail as they changed shifts, his body language suggesting he was counting them, memorizing their patterns, and during an evening reception, she caught him watching a group of station workers who were performing routine maintenance on a communications panel. His focus intense despite the apparent mundanity of their work. "Your Highness," Danny said quietly during a recess between sessions, approaching her with a formality that bordered on stiffness. "I need to speak with you privately." Valith sighed and excused herself from a conversation with a Selenari trade minister, stepping aside with obvious reluctance. "What is it?" "Private. Something is wrong," Danny said, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I have been watching the delegation since we arrived, and I have identified at least 3 separate groups coordinating their movements." Valith raised one of her 4 eyebrows, a gesture that conveyed both skepticism and mild irritation. "Coordinating their movements," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am," Danny continued. "The Krathvex are interested in the ventilation systems, specifically the access points that connect to the diplomatic quarters and the central hub. Their questions during the tour were not about atmospheric compatibility, but about maintenance schedules and security protocols." Valith opened her mouth to dismiss him, but he pressed on. "The Morvathi have doubled their security detail overnight, which would make sense if they expected trouble. But they have not filed any formal concerns with station security, which suggests they know something they are not sharing. Private Rays. And there is a third group," Danny said. "Station workers who arrived 2 days before us on a maintenance vessel. But their movements do not match normal maintenance patterns. They are mapping the corridors, testing the locks." Noting the positions of security cameras, he finally paused, his tired eyes meeting her 4 gleaming ones. "They are planning something, Your Highness. I am certain of it." Valith stared at him for a long moment, her expression shifting from irritation to something approaching disbelief. "You have been here for 2 days," she said slowly. "Our intelligence division has been monitoring this summit for months. Do you honestly expect me to believe that you, a private first class who has probably never left his home system before this assignment, have noticed something that trained professionals missed?" "Yes." Ma'am, the simple certainty in his voice was almost amusing. "Private Rays." "I appreciate your vigilance," Valith said, adopting the patient tone one might use with an overeager child. "But I think you are seeing threats where none exist. Perhaps the stress of your first major assignment is affecting your judgment." Danny did not argue, did not try to convince her further. He simply nodded once, his expression unreadable behind those tired eyes. "As you wish, Your Highness," he said. "But I have already sent my observations to my commanding officer aboard the Resolute, and I have asked them to place the ship on standby alert, just in case." Valith felt a flash of anger at his presumption. He had no authority to make such requests without consulting her first. But before she could reprimand him, he continued, "I understand that you do not trust my judgment, and I accept that. But if I am wrong, the worst that happens is some humans lose sleep for no reason. And if I am right," he did not finish the sentence, leaving the implication hanging in the air between them. Valith dismissed him with a wave of her hand and returned to her diplomatic duties, pushing his warnings to the back of her mind. That night, as she prepared for sleep in her quarters, She found herself thinking about the strange intensity in his eyes when he spoke of the threats he had perceived. There had been no fear there. No panic, just a quiet certainty that reminded her of veteran soldiers she had met. Warriors who had survived enough battles to trust their instincts, absolutely. But that was impossible. He was just a recruit. A young man barely out of training. What could he possibly know about real danger? The answer came 3 hours later, when the station's power grid went dark and the screaming began. The darkness came without warning, swallowing the station in an instant as every light, every screen, every system flickered and died. Princess Valeth woke to the sound of emergency alarms blaring through the corridors, their harsh tones cutting through the confusion as red backup. Lights bathed everything in a bloody glow. She had barely risen from her bed when her chamber door exploded inward. 3 shapes rushed through the smoke. Krathvek's warriors in full combat armor, their claws extended and gleaming in the crimson light. They moved with the speed and precision of apex predators, their massive bodies surprisingly agile as they converged on her position. Valeth screamed and threw herself backward, knowing even as she moved that she could never escape creatures bred for exactly this kind of work. The first warrior reached for her with a clawed hand that could crush her skull like soft fruit, and then Danny. Rias was there. He emerged from the shadows beside her doorway, like a ghost materializing from nothing, his body low and moving at a speed that seemed impossible for a species without natural weapons or armor. He did not try to block the Krathvek's warrior's attack that would have been suicide against an opponent 3 times his mass. Instead, he slipped inside the creature's reach and drove a combat knife upward through the gap between the armor plates, protecting its throat, finding the one vulnerable point in its natural defenses with surgical precision. The warrior collapsed without making a sound, its lifeblood pouring across the floor. The other 2 Krathveks hesitated for just a fraction of a second, surprised by the sudden death of their companion. That hesitation cost them everything. Danny moved like water flowing through cracks in stone, his body weaving between their grasping claws as he fired twice with his sidearm. Both shots found their marks, the exposed joints where their armored arms connected to their shoulders, the only places where energy weapons could penetrate their natural defenses. They fell with roars of pain and fury, disabled but not dead, and Danny finished them with quick efficiency before turning to Valeth. "We need to move now." "Your Highness," he said, his voice calm and steady despite what he had just done. "The attack is station-wide, and this position is not defensible." Valeth stared at him with all 4 of her eyes wide open, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. 3 Krathvek's warriors, creatures feared across the galaxy for their combat prowess, had died in less than 10 seconds at the hands of a human she had dismissed as worthless. How? She started to ask. "Later," Danny said, grabbing her arm with surprising gentleness and pulling her toward the door. "Right now we run." They ran. The corridors of Nexera Station had become a nightmare landscape of emergency lighting and scattered bodies. As Valeth saw members of different delegations lying where they had fallen, some still, some moaning in pain, some clearly beyond any help. The sounds of combat echoed from every direction, energy weapons discharging, voices screaming in a dozen different languages. The heavy footsteps of attackers hunting their prey. Danny navigated through the chaos with an instinct that bordered on precognition, somehow knowing which corridors were safe and which held enemies before they rounded each corner. When they encountered resistance, he eliminated it with the same brutal efficiency he had shown in her quarters. Morvath the assassin dropped from a ceiling vent, its poisoned claws aimed at Vela's throat. Danny caught it mid-leap and snapped its neck with a single motion before it could deploy its venom. 2 more Krathvek's warriors blocked a junction ahead. Danny threw a concussion grenade that stunned them long enough for him to close the distance. And then he was among them with his knife, exploiting weaknesses in their armor that Valith would never have known existed. She lost count of how many enemies fell before they finally found temporary shelter in a maintenance corridor, a narrow space filled with pipes and conduits that provided cover from multiple directions. "What is happening?" Valith demanded, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. "Who was behind this?" Danny was reloading his sidearm, his breathing steady even though he should have been exhausted. "Three groups working together," he said, confirming the warnings he had given her just hours ago. "The Krathveks are providing shock troops for direct assault. The Morvathi are handling infiltration and assassination. And a mercenary company called the Void Fangs has taken control of the docking bays to prevent anyone from escaping." "How do you know all this?" I listened. Danny said simply, "I watched. I paid attention to patterns that others ignored. Humans are good at that." "Good at what?" Valith asked. Danny looked at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never noticed before, something old and deep and dangerous. Something that did not belong in the face of a young soldier. "Good at surviving," he said. "Good at recognizing threats before they become deadly. Good at adapting to situations that should kill us." He finished reloading and checked the corridor in both directions before continuing. "Your Highness, I need you to understand something. My species did not evolve to be the strongest or the fastest or the most armored. We grew up on a planet where everything wanted to kill us. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the bacteria in our own bodies." The listened, something in his tone compelling her attention despite the chaos around them. "We spent 200,000 years fighting our way to the top of the food chain," Danny continued. "We hunted creatures that were bigger than us, faster than us, stronger than us, and we won. Not because we were better than them, but because we refused to stop." He tapped his temple with one finger. "We do not have claws or fangs or venom," he said. "We just have the ability to think, to plan, to adapt, to keep going when any sane creature would give up, and the will to use it no matter what the cost." A sound echoed from somewhere nearby, footsteps, multiple sets. Moving in their direction, Danny raised his weapon and positioned himself between Valith and the approaching threat. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I am getting you out of here, no matter what it takes." Valith looked at this young human soldier, this private first class she had dismissed as just a recruit, and finally began to understand how wrong she had been. He was not remarkable because of his strength or his weapons or his training. He was remarkable because he was human, and humans, she was beginning to realize, were something far more dangerous than anyone in the galaxy had imagined. Word spread through the dying station like fire through dry grass. There was a human on level 7. A single human soldier escorting the Etherian princess through hostile territory. And everywhere he went, he left bodies behind. Survivors, hiding in sealed compartments, whispered about him through emergency communication channels, their voices mixing disbelief with something approaching. Selinari, diplomat who had watched from behind a barricade, described how the human had killed 5 Void Fang mercenaries without slowing down, moving through them like a blade through water. A Vorthek engineer, trapped in a collapsed section, reported hearing the sounds of combat nearby, followed by silence, followed by a human voice asking if anyone needed assistance. The stories grew with each retelling, but even the truth was extraordinary enough. Princess Valith stayed close to Danny Rice as they made their way through the station's lower levels, moving toward a destination she did not yet understand. She had stopped questioning his decisions hours ago. After watching him navigate through situations that should have been impossible, he seemed to know things he could not possibly know. Which corridors were safe, which enemies were waiting around corners, which routes would lead them to safety, and which would lead to death. how are you doing this? She finally asked during a brief rest in an abandoned storage bay. You cannot be reading their minds, so how do you know where they will be? Danny was checking his remaining ammunition. His movements methodical and calm. I am not reading their minds, he said. I am reading their patterns. Every species has patterns, ways they think, ways they move, ways they respond to threats. The Krathvax are aggressive and direct, so they will take the most obvious routes and attack head-on. The Morvathi are subtle and patient, so they will use ventilation systems and maintenance corridors. The Void Fangs are mercenaries, so they will prioritize high-value targets over random kills. He looked up at her with those tired eyes that seemed to see everything. Once you understand how someone thinks, you can predict what they will do. And once you can predict what they will do, you can be somewhere else. Where did you learn this? Valith asked. Earth, Danny said simply. My species has been studying predators since before we had language. We learned their patterns so we could avoid becoming prey. And then we learned their patterns so we could become predators ourselves, before Valith could respond. A sound echoed through the storage bay, voices speaking in standard, the common language used by most spacefaring species. Danny raised his weapon, but his posture shifted slightly as he listened. Human, he said quietly. Multiple humans. Moving this way. He stepped out from cover and called out in a language Valith did not understand, his native tongue. She realized something harsh and efficient that carried clearly through the darkness. A response came back in the same language. And moments later, a group emerged from the shadows. There were 7 of them, 5 women and 2 men, all wearing the same gray armor as Danny's unit, all carrying weapons scavenged from fallen enemies or emergency lockers. Private Reyes, one of them said, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, her face streaked with blood that did not appear to be her own. I am Staff Sergeant Lisa Park, diplomatic security escort for the Selenari delegation. Status? Danny asked. My principal is dead, Lisa said, her voice flat with the kind of calm that comes from pushing emotions aside for later. The Morvathi got to him before I could reach his quarters. I have been gathering survivors since then. Mostly other human security personnel. She looked at Valith with a quick, professional assessment. I see you have managed to keep yours alive, so far, Danny said. What is the situation station-wide? Bad, Lisa replied. The attackers have taken the central hub, where they are holding high-value hostages, ambassadors, council members, anyone worth ransoming or executing for political effect. The docking bays are locked down, communications are jammed, and station security was wiped out in the first wave. How many hostiles? Best estimate. 300 combined forces between the Krathvax, Morvathi, and Void Fangs, Lisa said. They have complete control of all critical systems, Danny nodded slowly. Processing the information. And how many humans on the station? Besides us, Lisa said, gesturing to her group. Maybe 20 more scattered across different levels. We have been trying to link up, but movement is dangerous. Then we link up, Danny said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to draw the attention of everyone present. We gather every human we can find, and then we go to the central hub. Lisa stared at him. Private. Did you hear what I said? 300 hostiles? Complete control of the station, and you want to assault their stronghold. The hostages in that hub are leverage, Danny said. As long as the attackers hold them, they control the outcome of this situation. Rescue forces will negotiate, pay ransoms, make concessions. And the people behind this attack will achieve whatever goals drove them to plan it in the first place. He looked around at the gathered humans, tired, wounded, outgunned, and outnumbered. But if we take those hostages back, the attackers lose everything. Their plan fails, their investment is wasted, and they gain nothing but enemies. It is suicide. Vela said. Speaking for the first time since the others had arrived, Danny looked at her with something that might have been a smile. Your Highness, my grandfather's grandfather fought in a war where humans threw themselves at fortified positions for years because they believed in something bigger than survival. 50,000 of them died taking a single beach on a single day. And they did it because giving up was not an option. He turned back to the other humans. 300 mercenaries and warriors are not going to stop us. Not if we refuse to be stopped. Lisa Park studied him for a long moment. Her expression unreadable then. She nodded slowly. What are your orders? Private. Danny blinked, surprised by the question. I am a private first class, he said. You outrank me by several grades. You have a plan, Lisa said. You have kept your principal alive longer than anyone else on this station. And you are the only person I have met tonight who seems to think we can actually win this. Rank does not matter right now, leadership does. She looked around at the other humans, who were all watching the exchange with quiet intensity. So I ask again, Lisa said. What are your orders? Danny was silent for a moment, the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden. Then he straightened and spoke with a voice that carried no doubt. Gather everyone you can find, he said. Every human on this station who can hold a weapon. We move in 2 hours. And we do not stop until those hostages are free or we are dead. And if we are dead, one of the other humans asked. Danny's tired eyes hardened into something cold and unyielding. Then we make sure we take enough of them with us that the next group has a chance, one by one. Every human in the room nodded their agreement. They had their orders. Now they just had to survive long enough to follow them. The battle for the central hub would later be called the Nexus Stand, and it would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. Historians would debate the tactics. Strategists would analyze the movements, and philosophers would argue about what it revealed about the nature of humanity. But for those who were there, for those who lived it, there was no time for analysis or philosophy. There was only the fight. Danny Reyes led 15 humans against 300 combined hostiles, and by every reasonable calculation, they should have died in the first 5 minutes. The Void Fangs had fortified the approaches to the central hub with heavy weapons and overlapping fields of fire, creating kill zones that no conventional force could breach. The Krathvex warriors formed the inner defense, their armored bodies creating a living wall around the hostages. The Morvathi assassins lurked in the shadows, ready to strike at anyone who managed to survive the outer defenses. It was a perfect defensive position, designed by professionals who understood warfare at its most brutal level. Danny looked at it and saw opportunity. They're expecting a frontal assault, he said to Lisa Park as they crouched in a maintenance corridor, studying the enemy positions through a cracked security feed. They have built their entire defense around stopping someone from coming through the main approaches, because that is the only way in. Lisa said. No, Danny replied. That is the only way in for species who think like they do. The Krathvex cannot fit through ventilation shafts. The Morvathi need room to maneuver for their assassination techniques. The mercenaries are used to fighting in open spaces where their numbers and firepower give them the advantage. He traced a path on the security feed with his finger. But humans are different. We spent our evolutionary history chasing prey into caves and through dense forests. We can squeeze through spaces that would trap larger species. We can fight in conditions that would break others. And we can keep going long after our bodies should have given up. Lisa studied the route he had indicated. You want us to come at them from inside the walls themselves. I want us to come at them from everywhere. Danny said. We split into 5 groups, each one taking a different approach. We hit them simultaneously from directions they cannot defend. And we do not stop moving until we reach the hostages. If even one group fails, the others will be surrounded and destroyed. Danny nodded. Then no one. Fails. The attack began at exactly midnight by station time. Danny's group breached through a maintenance hatch that opened directly into the hub's upper level, dropping into the middle of a Void Fang fire team before they could react. Lisa's group emerged from the ventilation system on the opposite side, their weapons blazing as they caught the Morvathi assassins from behind. The other three groups hit simultaneously, one through the floor panels, one through an emergency airlock, one through a section of wall that they had rigged with explosives salvaged from a demolished security station. The attackers' carefully constructed defense collapsed into chaos as enemies appeared from impossible directions, striking and moving and striking again before they could be properly targeted. The Krathvex warriors roared their fury and charged toward the humans, expecting their superior strength and armor to turn the battle in their favor. But the humans did not stand and fight the way the Krathvex expected. They flowed around the charging warriors like water around stones, exploiting gaps in their formation, striking at joints and weak points before dancing away to strike again from a different angle when the Krathvex adapted and tried to corner them. The humans simply changed tactics, using the environment itself as a weapon, pulling cables to create trip hazards, overloading power conduits to create barriers of sparking electricity, collapsing ceiling panels onto their enemies' heads. The Morvathi fared no better. They tried to use their stealth and their poison, slipping through the shadows to strike at unprotected backs, but the humans seemed to sense them coming, always turning at the last moment, always ready with a blade or a bullet or an elbow to the throat. One human woman, a security officer named Maria Santos, who had lost her entire team in the initial attack, killed 3 Morvathi in hand-to-hand combat after her weapon jammed, breaking their necks with techniques that turned their own momentum against them. The Void Fangs fought with professional discipline, falling back to secondary positions, trying to regroup and establish new defensive lines. But the humans did not give them time. Every time the mercenaries tried to organize, another group of humans hit them from an unexpected direction, disrupting their formations, killing their officers, destroying their communications, and through it all, Danny Reyes moved like death incarnate. He fought with everything he had and everything he was, knife and gun and fist and fury, never stopping, never hesitating, never showing any sign of the pain that must have been building in his exhausted body when a Krathvex warrior finally caught him with a glancing blow that cracked 3 of his ribs. He simply grunted and drove his knife through the creature's eye when a Morvathi's poison barb grazed his arm. He cut the affected flesh away with his own blade and kept fighting when his ammunition ran out. He picked up weapons from fallen enemies when those weapons failed. He used his hands. The battle lasted 47 minutes by official count, though it felt like hours to those who fought it when it finally ended. The central hub was littered with bodies, mostly attackers, but humans too. Brave souls who had given everything they had. Of the 15 humans who had begun the assault, 9 remained standing. The hostages, over 200 representatives from dozens of species, were freed, and in the center of the hub, surrounded by the bodies of those who had tried to stop him, Danny Reyes faced the last of the enemy commanders. Goros the Unbroken was a Kravith mercenary lord who had earned his name by never retreating, never surrendering, never showing weakness to any opponent. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body a mountain of muscle and armored hide, his war axe gleaming with the blood of countless victories. Behind him stood the remnants of his forces, perhaps 50 warriors who had survived the human onslaught. They still outnumbered the humans 5 to 1. They still had superior weapons, superior armor, superior strength by any measure. They should have. Goros the Unbroken raised his war axe and prepared to order the final charge that would wipe out these annoying humans once and for all. Then he looked into Danny Reyes' eyes, and he saw something that made him hesitate. The human was wounded, exhausted, barely able to stand on his own 2 feet. His armor was torn, his weapons were broken. His body was held together by nothing but willpower and adrenaline, but his eyes, his tired, ordinary, unremarkable human eyes, held no fear, no desperation, no recognition that he was beaten. Danny Reyes looked at Goros the Unbroken, the same way he had looked at every enemy he had faced that night, as an obstacle to be overcome. Nothing more and nothing less, and behind Danny, the other humans were forming up 8 wounded, exhausted soldiers who should have been dead 10 times over, arranging themselves into a fighting formation with weapons scavenged from their fallen enemies. Not one of them showed any intention of surrendering. Not one of them showed any sign of accepting defeat. Goros the Unbroken had fought across 100 worlds against 100 species. He had faced warriors who were stronger than him, faster than him, more numerous than him, but he had never faced anything like this. He had never faced creatures who simply refused to stop. "What are you?" he whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. Danny Reyes looked at him with those tired eyes that had seen too much and surrendered nothing. "We are humans," he said, his voice hoarse but steady, "and these people are under our protection." The silence stretched for an eternity. Then, Goros the Unbroken did something he had never done in his entire career. He lowered his weapon one by one. The warriors behind him did the same. They retreated without another word, leaving the humans standing among the bodies of their fallen comrades. Victorious against all odds, the rescue fleet arrived 6 hours later, and by then the story had already begun to spread across the galaxy. Princess Valith found Danny Reyes sitting alone in a corner of the evacuation shuttle, staring at nothing. His wounds finally being treated by a medical drone. She sat down beside him, something she never would have done 2 days ago. "I looked at you and saw just a recruit," she said quietly. "I was wrong." Danny did not respond for a long moment. Then he said, "I am just a human doing what humans do. That is all any of us can be." Valith thought about everything she had witnessed, the courage, the sacrifice, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. She thought about what she had learned about humanity in those desperate hours, and she understood at last why Goros the Unbroken had lowered his eyes. The galaxy was full of apex predator species that had evolved to kill, that had been designed by nature or engineering to be the ultimate warriors. But humans were something different. Humans were not apex predators because of what they were. They were apex predators because of what they refused to stop being. And that, Valith realized, was far more terrifying than any claw or fang or venom could ever be. She looked at Danny Reyes, this ordinary, unremarkable, impossibly extraordinary human, and felt something she had never expected to feel: respect, and perhaps, just perhaps, a little bit of fear. The story of the Nextra stand spread across the galaxy.